Well, Steve, we're in a whole new world checking this one out. This is Scarlet Nexus. We took a look at this kind of game that we don't see very often. This is an anime-inspired RPG, and it kind of sets its own whole universe up. This is a very large game to get into, and it's very story-driven for sure. But it does some interesting stuff with the combat, with the enemies, and a few things that I want to get into here. But as far as first impressions go, what did you think of this one, Steve?
I'd say, Scott, this kind of ticked all the boxes for me. I love the story-driven games, and this one is very quite deep and complex, but it did suck me in, and it's basically it's set in the future where technology now has super enhanced the brains and humanity, and some of them actually have certain abilities like psychokinesis and those kind of things. And your planet is being terrorized by aliens or creatures, and they're called the Others. And you cannot kill them with normal weapons and machine guns and things like that. The only people that can do that is the people with the special human powers, and they're called OSF, the Other Suppressive Force. And that's where you start up with Yuito and Kasane is the first characters you can pick from, one or the other.
Yeah, there's an interesting dual-layered storyline going on. As soon as you get into the game, you're met with a lot of different characters, and there's a lot of introductions kind of set up, and that reminds me really heavily of anime, certainly. And yeah, the way it's visually presented is kind of like a comic book kind of thing going on. And I think that's really interesting because it holds your attention. But you meet tons of these characters, and later on in the story, it becomes clear that everybody's kind of interwoven. There's parts of the game, parts of the story that are happening that you don't experience, but you're kind of told about. And I think that's because later on, you can actually switch characters, and instead of being Yuito, you go over to Kasane and you experience her whole half of the story. So it kind of does a split perspective thing that way. And I think that's interesting because it kind of gives you the chance to go through the story twice, in a way, without just replaying exactly what you finished. So I like that, and I think it's really interesting. The story is super heavy, though. So it takes a little to get into because it is quite long. There's a lot to the story, but like I said, I believe they're setting up a universe where we're going to see more sequels come down the line.
Oh, totally agree. And just touching on what you were saying is very based on the story driven. Everyone's got a story to tell, and there's even a point in the game where you go to your safe house, and there's a point that happens in your life that you're upset about, and so are the rest of your colleagues, and they sort of want to come over and you can go over and talk to them, and they'll tell you a bit, are you okay, and that kind of thing. So I love the way how it does try to connect you with the other characters, but like you said, I think it does become a little bit overwhelming because I'm trying to remember who's who and all those kind of all those things. But the graphically, like you said, that's my first time I've played an anime kind of game. And the way it's kind of like the postcards, like you'll have a still photo and then you'll have the two characters' faces come up. And I have to commend the voice acting. I thought they kind of nailed it with this game. It was in sync with the lip moving on the characters, and you know I couldn't fault it on that front. But there was a couple of things that did, which we're going to touch on now, was the game mechanics of this.
Yeah, it can be quite complicated. They've nailed the storytelling. The only issue I have with that is that it is quite long. Sometimes I just want to jump into the action, but it kind of presents you a lot of social dynamics and stuff to go through. which is really cool. It's good to bond with the party members, and there's certain ones that come and go. So there is definitely a function to it, but when it comes down to the actual combat of it, the gameplay, it's quite complicated. And it feels like for the first couple hours, it just keeps getting more and more complicated as you learn your abilities as one of these enhanced humans. You have your kinesis, you can throw objects. Party members that join you have fire, thunder, and invisibility, and there's a lot of imaginative powers that go on. So there's a lot of time you're spent kind of learning when and what is worth using in combat.
Yes.
And there's quite a lot of combo systems going on too, where you have a heavy attack, you have a light attack, and you're using that in sequence to kind of keep enemies pinned down. It can be quite complicated when you compare it to something like Final Fantasy 15, for example. 15 totally simplified the Final Fantasy thing, and I think they nailed that. But the alternative to that is what you find in Scarlet Nexus. It's a little more complicated, but it's up to you to learn how to use everything properly. And I think they do an interesting way of combat. I think it is effective. The only problem that I've had so far, actually, and this is something we've both mentioned, is the camera angles. It's a little hard to contend with the camera sometimes.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And I was going to say, the tutorial wasn't too bad, because when you get to certain areas where you have to use a new ability, you will get a little pop-up screen to say either hold X or R2 or whatever move to do it. Mm-hmm. And I do like the concept of the idea of using your other, your co-workers' abilities. They say you've got like a brain link, and certain others, you have to use special, like you said, combos to destroy him. And you can't just use your sword on it, so you have to use some of the abilities. And I think it was like teleportation, where you can dash quickly in front of it before it realises you're there to strike it to get the first attack on it. So I do like the idea of that, but exactly like you, some of the camera angles in the game was really bad for me. There was an issue where there was another on the ceiling and it was on a crate, and you use your Psychokinesis to pull the crate down to land on top, but one of my characters was down and I had to revive it, but he kept looking up at the ceiling, which I did find frustrating, as well as some of the combat as well. You feel like you're going to make contact, but you actually missed it because of the camera angle.
It's not that the camera moves in a weird way, it's just that your character kind of moves independently of the camera. So I often found myself just missing slightly, but I'm putting in like an 8-button combo, so now I'm missing for quite some time, and that definitely broke up the fluidity of the combat.
Yes.
And the other issue that I have, the only time the camera does kind of move around on me, it ends up being like a worm eye view. I'm looking way up into the sky, and that was a little strange because a lot of the environments are quite busy, and it's this urban sprawl. I would rather have a camera look down, if anything, than straight up. That was a little strange. Well, this game is very big, so if we've kind of brushed over some topics, that's intentional. It's a little hard to get the full scope of this game and explain it to somebody. It really has to be experienced itself. But there's definitely some really standout interesting things, and only a couple problems that we've both kind of run into. But if you're going to put a number on this one, what do you think about Scarlet Nexus, Steve?
Well, to be honest with Scott, apart from the camera angle, that didn't really totally ruin my experience, and there is still so much more story for me to get through, and I'm really enjoying this at the moment, and I'm loving everything about it. I'm giving this a 9.
Very nice. Yeah, I echo a lot of the things you're saying there. The camera was a little annoying, but not a deal breaker. And the story I find is long in the tooth, but I think that's just because I'm new to it, that it's feeling that way, and it does a great job of telling the story. whether I'm annoyed by it or not. But those are just two little gripes I have. Other than that, this game looks just like an awesome anime. It's very stylized in the way that Persona sort of is. There's a lot of character intermingling, and it's got me hooked in now for the long term. So I have to give this one an 8. I'm very impressed, but I just want to see a little bit more refinement.
Scarlet Nexus is a very fast-paced and stylish anime RPG with its deep equipment and skill customization and a huge emphasis on story and character interaction.